Good morning. Welcome to the 16th meeting of the committee in 2013. Can I ask everyone to make sure that they've switched off their mobile phones and other electronic devices, please? I've received apologies from Margaret Mitchell for this meeting, and I understand she's in the Cayman Islands in election duties. I never get these good jobs, it has to be said. Agenda item 2 is the National Planning Framework 3 and Scottish Planning Policy. Today we will be hearing evidence from Derek Mackay, Minister for Local Government and Planning, John McNerney, Chief Planner with the Scottish Government, and Fiona Simpson, Head of Environmental Assessment Team, Scottish Government. Minister, would you like to give us a brief statement?
Okay, thank you very much, Convener. Firstly, can I say that I very much welcome the opportunity to discuss these important changes to Scotland's national planning policies. I have a few brief opening remarks which I hope will be useful to the committee in outlining some of the context and background to these important consultations. Both the SPP and NPF3 are very wide-ranging, and so I will not attempt to summarise them at this point. However, I would like to focus on a few key points. I want the planning system now more than ever to focus on delivering jobs and growth. I want it to facilitate the investment in infrastructure, which will be crucial as we make the transition to the low-carbon economy. And I want the planning process to design better places, places that are distinctive, healthier, more sustainable and attractive to investors. Turning to the first comprehensive review of the Scottish planning policy, first and foremost, I want the SPP to be much clearer about how important it is that the planning system delivers jobs and growth as enablers. The economic benefits of a proposed development need to be a material consideration, and significant weight should be placed on economic benefits and on jobs in particular. The proposed policy reflects on the issues being covered in a review of town centres, which we'll be reporting shortly. The Scottish Government's support for renewable energy, including onshore wind, remains as strong as ever. But we need to see the right developments in the right places. We propose strengthening protection for our finest landscapes, including greater protection for wild land. Alongside this, we want to see more community benefits from new wind farms and more locally owned developments. We're committed to making the transition to a sustainable, growing, low-carbon economy. That's the primary focus of our proposals for the third National Planning Framework. The Main Issues report explores what Scotland should look like as a low-carbon place. It looks at the energy mix as a whole and considers the infrastructure we need to facilitate onshore and offshore renewable energy development. It also supports emerging carbon capture and storage technology and recognises the continuing importance of oil and gas. The Main Issues report explores planning and the environment, what makes Scotland a natural place to invest. There is strong support for green infrastructure, including the Central Scotland Green Network and a new national network of long-distance routes for walking and cycling. NPF3 should help to deliver our ambitions for our cities, making Scotland a successful, sustainable place. We attach a great deal of importance to effective collaboration through the Scottish Cities Alliance. A proposed strategy also promotes cohesion and regeneration, reducing disparities in wealth and environmental quality between different parts of Scotland. We want to support stronger transport links to make Scotland a connected place. The strategy aims to reduce the need to travel and link development with public transport networks. It also emphasises the importance of strengthening international connections, links between our cities, and connections to areas where we expect growth to take place in the longer term. We engaged extensively before preparing these documents. In particular, we've made the process for identifying national developments more transparent by inviting proposals from the start. The Main Issues report and the draft SPP are both products of that extensive and inclusive engagement. These two consultation documents provide a great opportunity for an inclusive debate on the role of national spatial planning. Over the coming weeks, I'll be visiting many of the proposed national developments and identified in the Main Issues report to raise awareness of our proposals and to encourage people to give us their views. And today I'm looking forward to hearing the committee's views on what we propose in these documents.
Thank you very much, Minister. Obviously, from a parochial point of view, I'm very happy to see the Aberdeen and North East elements of NPF3, particularly the harbour and the airport. And obviously today we'll touch upon the recommendations that the committee has made in the past in regards to the High Hedges Bill and the report on RPP2. But if I could begin, Minister, we have some avid Twitter followers in the Local Government Committee, and we have a couple of tweets from Mr. Bob Reid, and he has asked why the brownfield definition has been removed from SPP and the word, to use his term, expunged. And he says that brownfield regeneration policy is crucial to west of Scotland towns like Paisley and Greenock. I wonder if you have any comments round about Mr. Reid's comments, Minister.
Of course, Convener. I think it's a very pertinent question because definition matters so much within the planning system, but I don't want to tie us up in bureaucratic knots around language. The planning system should be about enabling development and regeneration. The sense of importance we place in regeneration has not changed. In fact, it's strengthened by these policies. It is correct to say in the current drafts we don't mention brownfields as such. Now, this is a consultation. If people prefer that we mention it, then we can restore that language. However, we have not had any shift in policy. It's language. And there is a debate about whether the terminology can improve around brownfield sites. Brownfield sites give you the impression of rusty, contaminated, previously used language. The language we've used in the consultation documents is previously developed land. So that gives a sense of infrastructure might already be in place. It doesn't carry the baggage, so to speak. So the policies are robust around regeneration, regenerate areas of, if you want to use the terminology, brownfield sites before you turn to the green belt. And environmental protection is perfectly clear, I think, in these policies. So I would want to reassure your many Twitter followers that their sense of importance and investment around regeneration remains intact, but I think the language has been improved. If that's not clear, then we're happy to look at it in this consultation process.
I think that's been very useful, Minister. Stuart Stevenson, please.
Thank you very much, Convener. I have 2 points to raise, one general and one more specific. Just on the general one to start with, we have both revised Scottish planning policy in front of us and NPF3 before us. How useful has it actually been for the first time to make changes to these two together, and what sort of interplay has there been between the two that you would describe as being particularly useful?
I think that's an excellent question. With Mr. Stevenson's expertise, will know that actually having consultations running together in the same themed areas is very productive. Some people often complain when it comes to consultations of consultation fatigue. They're asked questions again and again. Doing both together has been very productive and effective because it means people can engage once and feed into both processes, and a simultaneous review of Scottish planning policy and the national planning framework seemed like eminent sense to me, which is why I instructed our officials to conduct it in this fashion. So it's meant that people can engage once, they can engage properly, it can feed into both documents, and it's a very coordinated way of changing, I think, the planning system. If there were 3 legs of this reform, it's national planning policy, top of the planning hierarchy, Scottish planning policy, which is the judgments around individual applications, and then performance separately. And on performance, there's a separate action plan, which we've previously discussed. So I make sure all that's cohesive and coordinated so that, as you say, the policies interplay with each other. They're modern, they're fit for purpose, and have been properly transparent and engaging in terms of how we've gone out to consult upon them. So there's been great benefit in doing this. And of course, there's probably a saving in doing it all together at the one time as well.
I wonder, Minister, if you were able to identify anything specific in what's before us that has been drawn from that interplay.
In terms of the ambitions for Scotland, to realise the offshore ambitions, be it marine or the offshore renewables, conducting these policy reviews at the same time as we've been working up the marine plan and marine strategy has been very beneficial. So too the imminent architecture policy, reviewing that at the same time, focus in place, designing streets. So it's been a pretty hard pace for those involved in the system, all our stakeholders, all our partners, as well as the ever-enduring civil service with the Minister's demands. But I think it's been very productive to do it all together. And hopefully it means we've got a package of policies right across the portfolios in Team Scotland that are focused for the ambitions we have for the country.
I saw Mr McNerney momentarily smile there, so hit some buttons. Indeed, which is why, Minister, I wish to draw it to everyone's attention. And to say that Mr McNerney could do it as often as he likes as far as the committee is concerned. However, to move quickly to my specific point, in the NPF 3 that's before us at map 24, which is about digital infrastructure, I'm not going to be terribly detailed. I just wondered if, in highlighting that as part of what's before us, there is enough in here specifically that's actually going to help make a fundamental difference by making a reference in NPF 3 to that. And it is, of course, in the section about decarbonisation, and I think properly so, because if we can do more things without having to travel, then carbon-wise, that's going to be more efficient. So I just wondered if you could point us perhaps at how this is really going to help in and of itself, in addition to other things that are happening, the big investments the government's making, to increase the capability of our digital infrastructure.
Digital infrastructure and the digital revolution is the key, not just for public sector partners, but for private enterprise and others as well. Only this morning I was speaking to public body sector leaders about the importance of digital first in terms of how we provide public services, and that too is the opportunity for our enterprising economy. So we, as you say, must have the infrastructure in place. This is not a spending document, but of course a planning document at the top of the planning hierarchy, and sets out how important we think the digital strategy is. So as well as giving a sympathetic and supportive environment in which decisions, financial decisions, investment decisions can be made around that digital revolution, there is a digital strategy that works in harmony with this. That does have spending commitments around it in terms of what the public and the private sector have signed up to, which will open up much of the country to the new age of digital technology, so that Scotland is not left behind, and indeed rural parts of Scotland are not left behind, and there's substantial financial commitment from both government and local authorities on that. I should also add that I think there is further scope within the planning system for more work on this. So we've outlined the vision, the consenting environment in which we are currently exploring. But I think one follow-on from this that I'm actively considering at the moment is the planning system around telecommunications, where infrastructure is already in place but technology is moving forward. And I'm very interested in what's happening in England. I do not want Scotland to be left behind in terms of the planning system, permitted development and consent. So we will be launching a consultation off the back of these policies in light of what's happening in England, to make sure that if we get the investment, we get the infrastructure, the planning system isn't necessarily a bureaucratic barrier to further rollout. There was a time when people said they didn't want the technology in their community. Now I sense that has completely changed to people saying, why can't we have 4G broadband so we can have businesses, so we can have access, and so we can be connected the way the rest of the world could be. So I think this is a very dynamic and emerging area in which we're doing further work. This is a very good proposition, but I think we will return on a very specific question of permitted development for emerging technology over the weeks and months ahead.
Follow up on that, Minister, and ask how involved the private companies are in terms of this consultation. I met with a representative of the company 3 the other week and was absolutely amazed at the amount of download there was in terms of digital material on mobile devices now, and was quite impressed to hear that in some places where there is a difficulty in terms of broadband connection, and I think, if I remember rightly, Durness was mentioned, the infrastructure is there to allow folk to do all that they could do with fixed broadband with this mobile digital technology. So how involved are they? How involved are they in actually sharing facilities? And does that does the planning process help in that regard?
I think, Convener, you as a former elected member will know sometimes the difficulty of a local authority, will know the difficulty of sometimes communities and perceptions around the telecommunications industry, but I do have a sense that that has moved on and we've looked at the evidence. So the telecommunications operators I've met with before, they've been engaged in this process, but we're now looking at the specific options that might emerge from what's happening in England. So I had only just yesterday asked that we have a further meeting with the operators to see whether the policy goes far enough. In terms of general business engagement with these policies, there's been far more engagement with this SPP review and national planning framework than I think any other planning review. Over 250 bids for national candidate projects, events across the country. So I think we've been very comprehensive in the engagement process. And when you talk to particular sectors with a sectoral interest, clearly they'll be most interested in that which affects them. But for the reasons we've discussed over the last few minutes, I want to probe further what added impetus the planning system can add so that it's not seen as a barrier. My aspiration for the planning system is that this is the best place in these islands to do business. And that will involve choices. But hopefully this sets the context in which we can create that kind of environment.
Okay, thank you, Minister. If I could maybe move you on to some of the recommendations that the committee has made, and maybe start with the High Hedges bill, where we made a number of recommendations at stage one, including the recommendation that the Scottish Government take the opportunity of the ongoing review of Scottish planning policy to examine the issues raised, such as residential development in proximity to woodland, which we heard a lot about in evidence, and we actually saw for ourselves in a visit to Cumbernauld. Can I ask if all of these recommendations that we have made round about the High Hedges bill will be looked at during this consultation process?
Absolutely, if people want us to refine it further. If the planning system is overly formulaic and bureaucratic, it might in itself be a barrier to development. But in all of this, in all of the ethos and drive of the planning system, we have a focus on place and quality and environment. So of course the comments around how you're designing, where you plant shrubbery, and I remember this debate very well, shrubbery or trees, so green infrastructure, greenery, plants, as much as the physical infrastructure, would be taken into account in any planning application. I suppose the raised awareness now of High Hedges through the success of that bill by Mark MacDonald will feed into the thinking of planners when they are making individual decisions. Producing planning policy is guidance and gives strength and comfort to planners making decisions. But I don't want chapter and verse on absolutely everything. That is unnecessary. That would be a completely top-down government approach. But what this does is create the right conditions in which planners can make decisions with confidence. So the sentiment that was expressed by this committee has been taken on board. If you want me to be more specific, we can consider that. But I think for the reasons I've given, if we're overly specific about a type of shrubbery in the planning system, I don't think that's necessarily what you were wanting as a committee.
I don't think that's what the committee wanted at all, and I think that what we were driving at was a degree of gumption, a degree of common sense in terms of how development takes place, and also for folks to take cognizance of the environment round about the development that is already there, or what that may be in 20 years, which leads me to another question round about charrettes. I had the opportunity of going to a pilot charrette experiment in Aberdeen, which I think was extremely useful for all of those that took part in that. Can I ask what moves we're making towards creating that kind of environment where there is huge input from people about what can happen where there is major development?
Convener, I think that's absolutely right to raise that, because if we engage communities properly at the start of the process, then it takes a lot of the heat out of the system. At the end of the process, where it results in objections and dissatisfaction in the system, so if we can build confidence. At the core of this is a plan-led planning system. So we formulate a plan which sets out the land use in each part of the country. My 4 pillars of planning reforms: plan-led system, first and foremost, streamlining and simplification, improved performance, and actually delivering development on the ground. So at the core of that is a plan-led development. So to ensure that plans reflect what people actually want, we're rolling out charrettes rather than just good projects here and there, and we're upscaling it so that local authorities increasingly use charrettes to arrive at their local plan. So that can help direct where development should more appropriately go in the planning system. So charrettes, and however we term it, it's about engagement, early intervention in the planning process to help shape future decisions is exactly how I want to turn the system round. And that goes for elected members too. Elected members often are consulted at the end of the process when they're making a determination. And for that reason, we're encouraging pre-application discussions for significant applications so that elected members can have their say earlier on. That's not just good for the community and the elected member, it's good for the applicant, and they can hear what the early views are without prejudicing an application, but properly engage in the system. And I think that'll be far more effective, efficient, and help build confidence in the planning system.
Thank you. Stuart Stevenson, please.
I was going to move on to another subject of ports, Convener, if that's appropriate. I very much welcome the addition of Aberdeen and Peterhead ports to the national planning framework that's before us. I think with the significant economic input that there is from the North East, it's absolutely important that we support continued growth via ports. I do, however, connect to the previous NPF where we had Scapa Flow as a proposed interchange for container traffic. Now, neither Peterhead nor Aberdeen are particularly container focused, and I just wondered, Minister, whether the focus is now moving away from container, albeit recognising that Grangemouth is within what's proposed, and it's essentially a container port, to more international connections and more offshore services being provided from these ports. And of course, given that the 1998 Scotland Act specifically prevents the government from directly supporting international shipping services, is the support for ports part of the way in which, within the limitations that are in the powers that we have, that we can do something that is of genuine assistance?
I was very happy that Mr. Stephen picked up the limitations. Often, I had a colleague that used to say in local government, when I was in local government, what's this got to do with independence? And this has everything to do with independence, because this is what we can do with the powers at our disposal. But as the forward, I think, very helpfully captures, we could do so much more in bringing forward investment decisions if we had access not just to our own resources, but to the full levers of control around a range of policies, and I think that's very adequately covered in the forward of a planning document, but for good reason, because it is about investment in the country. Specifically on Scapa Flow, we do believe it is still a long-term proposal. There are still ambitions for that site, and therefore it is safeguarded for those range of opportunities. And I suppose of the 250 bids for national designation, just because it doesn't feature, it doesn't mean it's not a priority. This is about the hierarchy of planning, and so that the range of potential and opportunities that exist right around the coast can still be realised. This national planning framework, you are correct, has a much stronger focus looking to the coast than its predecessor documents, and that's partly because we recognise the opportunities that exist in terms of transport, tourism. It's much stronger in tourism. The diversity of our ports, Aberdeen is just one example, but it will benefit from this new designation. But we have looked to the coast, not least the East Coast, in terms of the economic potential that's there, but from a range of functions, be it freight, and of course also the onshore opportunities for offshore development as well that we've touched upon. So these harbours have been given that degree of support because we recognise the economic and the environmental potential that exists right around the coast, and as I say, connects very helpfully with the marine plan, which a great deal of work's been carried out on over the last few years. Of course, that's just the East Coast. There's also issues on the West Coast, and very importantly, the Northern Isles as well.
I now specifically found the restriction which is in Schedule 5 of the 1990 Act at Section E3, and it specifically reads as something we cannot do: financial assistance to shipping services which start or finish or both outside Scotland. And I do recall that that was a particular difficulty when we were grappling with trying to sustain the ferry service to Zeebrugge from Rosyth, that we were specifically excluded from able to do some of the things. So therefore, Minister, I leave you with the strong thought that investing in the port infrastructure is very important in the context of our not being able to do some of the things we might otherwise choose to do.
And I think it's important to add that for many investors across the world, they will look at these documents and see it as a prospectus of where to invest and to do business. And this gives a degree of planning certainty and also a very positive commercial environment in which to make investment decisions. And so those comments are very welcome.
I'm glad that Mr. Stevenson touched upon cruise liners and tourism. I'm not going to say very much more because Mr. McMillan is next, and I think he may touch upon that. I've got a funny feeling.
How did you know that, convener? But certainly, I'll take you to the West Coast now, Minister, and obviously you'll be aware very much of the growth in the cruise liner industry. Certainly coming into the harbour, into the port in Greenock. And already, there have been 5 vessels, over 10,000 passengers already this season. That's only in the last 2.5 weeks. So it's certainly played a huge role in bringing in additional revenue into the Inverclyde economy. And I know that there are some limitations at that particular port. In terms of other vessels that they can bring in. For instance, that this year they've actually had to turn vessels away, and going forward that actually might continue to be the case because they are at capacity. And I know there has been various discussions have taken place between the owners and also with the government to see if there's any potential way of assistance. Now, also, I'm very much aware of a comment you just mentioned a moment ago that you said that because something might not actually appear in the document, if it doesn't feature, then it doesn't mean it can't be included going forward, and it can't be. Doesn't mean it's going to be ruled out for any potential assistance. So, can you provide any clarification or any words of comfort or hope that the likes of the facility in Greenock might actually be included, and also if there's any information provided in terms of any further discussions?
Absolutely. The first thing I would say is if you look at page 71 of the NPF 3, hoping you've got the same page numbers as I have, but that should be Firth of Clyde, and you'll see in the diagram there it touches on some of the points of connection. So what this document's able to do is crystallise and exemplify where connection points are. See, the issue at Inverclyde is not necessarily that it requires national designation to be achieved. It might be investment decisions, it might be other policy decisions, but this in no way lessens the ambition for Inverclyde or the Firth of Clyde or that part of the country. In fact, it's a green light to that kind of, without prejudicing any planning application, of course, but it's a very positive document about securing sustainable economic growth. So there's industrial interest in that, there's tourist interest in that, and there's a focus on place, all of which are complementary for Inverclyde, and you've been a very strong advocate for the cruise liner industry there, for the connections it makes to the local economy and to the whole of Scotland. Why do people come to Scotland? It's not just because it's a place in a map, it's because of the beauty, the environment and the economic attractions we have in this country. They're all, I think, promoted in this policy document. The connections are promoted and the Firth of Clyde's there. If you take another example of the how the west of Scotland's benefited from the previous MPF 2, that's included rail, massive investment in rail to improve connections, so they've got an integrated transport system, as well as a Central Scotland Green Network. That's about regeneration, greening the environment, using green infrastructure too. But as I say, that focus now on tourism as well in the planning document is very positive and presents further opportunities. So expansion and consolidation and further opportunities can be realised through these policies at that location. It doesn't need to say so as a national candidate or a national designation, because it doesn't require that status. And where this adds value in terms of national sites is where the status helps achieve consents, and Inverclyde doesn't necessarily need that. It's more a question of regeneration, connectedness and so on, rather than requiring a planning status. Because I would imagine, knowing those that are interested in regenerating the riverside there, would be, I think, quite keen and sympathetic to a very positive and proactive planning status, so that the ambitions of the Regeneration Company and others can be achieved. So I hope that gives you that certainty that we're absolutely supportive of the ambitions there, but to achieve it doesn't require the added status that this brings, but the whole thrust of these documents is very supportive.
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sir Stevenson, please.
Another subject, Convener. I very much welcome the promotion that appears to have taken place of the value that we place on natural spaces in Scotland, which of course are one of the reasons many people come to Scotland. It's not because we have a climate, although today may be an exception, that you get in Mediterranean beaches, but because of the natural vistas. And one of the changes that has come with what's before us is, of course, an increase in the separation distance for wind turbines from 2 kilometres to 2.5. I wonder, Minister, given that there are a number of councils who in their local policies have not adopted the recommendations that there are in Scottish planning policy, and I'm thinking in particular of the council which covers 85% of my seat, Aberdeenshire, where they operate a 400-metre separation and then complain about having too many wind turbines, whether it would be something you would consider to promote more heavily to the 34 planning authorities the need to look closely at what is appropriate separation, having regard to the national recommendation and to local circumstances, because of course it's not about taking discretion away from local authorities, but whether it's time perhaps to draw firmly to some councils' attention that the national guidance is now 2.5 kilometres rather than some of the figures that are used by people like Aberdeenshire.
It should be clear that these policies, the Scottish planning policy, at the moment are emerging, are out for consultation, and once concluded will then be adopted. So the terminology should abide by now will be relevant when they're adopted. So for Scottish planning policy, that will be probably December this year. Because of the process, abiding by the will of Parliament, MPF Freeze adoption will probably be June 2014. So we've given guidance in the past about how policies should be interpreted, and clearly the right time to do that is when we adopt the new policies, and we'll be clear on that. I think the range of policies as they relate to renewables, and specifically wind farms, is much clearer. The renewables industry had been asking, as have communities, for clarity, and I think it is clearer what we propose in terms of separation distances and other matters. And we are proposing to extend the separation distance from those settlements from 2k to 2.5k, and we're posing the question around that. People might have different views and different evidence as to why we should consider that. Of course, every single planning application must be considered on the merits of the case, and local circumstances will always feature, but there's now a range of proposals to give that greater protection for communities, but also there will be continued growth for renewables, because it's absolutely right as we move towards a low carbon economy and meet the most ambitious climate change targets in the world. And that's why we've posed a question on separation distance. And if we proceed, we will be very strong in the advice that we give, because people wanted clarity, and with clarity should come compliance.
I very much welcome that statement and the greater clarity that there is, that to both enable our renewables industry to be as successful as it reasonably can be, but also to allow communities to to have the space that they feel they need. I take it, Minister, there would be nothing, given that what is before us for consultation shows a direction of travel, I think a phrase that you have used on a number of previous occasions, towards a 2.5 kilometre separation. There would be nothing to stop councils in the interim and at their own hand deciding to adopt through their proper processes a revised separation in their local policies if they so wished.
I would prefer that local authorities adhered to the existing guidance until we change it, because it would create a muddle if there was a mixture between deployment of existing policy and emerging policy. So I prefer if people stuck to the advice that's provided at the moment. If people adhered to the advice that's there comprehensively at the moment, we'd probably be in a better place, but many people have described to me, not just on this particular subject, but in a range of areas, interpretation of planning policy across the country is too variable, and that's why the policies, by being as clear as they are, hopefully will get greater conformity. You know, still in local interpretation, local discretion, planners make a judgment, but the national policies should be as clear as possible so people know what's expected of them, and investors have confidence in the applications that they progress if they're in line with policy.
Just finally on that subject, Minister, there's clearly a legal framework around the timetable for NPF3. I don't think there is on SPP. So when is your expectation that we will have completed the necessary processes to update SPP, the Scottish planning policy, and therefore the point at which councils might, in the context of what you've just said, reasonably consider their own local application?
The consultation will last for 12 weeks, so that was launched about 2 or 3 weeks ago now. So the public consultation continues. When that's concluded, I'll consider the responses and then return with a set of proposals and policies on SPP and have them in place and adopted, I think, by the end of the year. One of the reasons is I'm absolutely convinced that the planning system must be more of an enabler for an economic recovery. So I'm keen to make progress on that, and that's why I want it concluded by the end of the year. And in working in partnership with the local planning authorities, working very closely, as I do, with the RTPI, Heads of Planning Scotland, Chief Executive and others, because of the partnership approach we've taken to this, early engagement, full consultation, I don't think there'll be many surprises. So we should be in a good place to have implementation on adoption by the end of the year and the start of 2014. And there clearly is a bit of work to do for refinement. But as the SPICE briefing note and other briefing notes will have said, some of it is not a departure from existing policy. That's a good sign that, broadly speaking, the planning system's working well. But where there will be changes and refinement, the most high profile is undoubtedly around wind farms and renewable. People are watching that very closely, and rightly so, and then they can then implement the policies at a local level. And to help with that, the government allocated this financial year over £700,000 to support planning authorities with resource issues, with those that did face the challenges and the pressures around applications and renewables. So that can help, I think, invest in the service. And of course, members supported the 20% increase in planning fees, which should also lead to further investment in the system, so that we've got the resources, the tools, the expertise and the engagement to get it right and get the policies implemented as quickly as possible.
John Pentland, please.
Thank you, Convener. I'm sure the Minister will not be surprised that I very much welcome the inclusion of Ravenscraig within the new NPF3 framework, and I would like to thank the Minister for obviously taking on board the concerns that was raised by myself and by many others, and hopefully that by its inclusion in this document will be the catalyst for much of it that could happen there. Could also welcome the change in language where we're identifying, where we're moving from, previous brownfield sites to previous developed land. And I think that in itself, will send quite a strong message out to any potential people who want to come to the Ravenscraig. My question is actually on moving to the SPP, and I've listened carefully to what you've said and where you're hoping that the policy can be clearer, and it should be an enabler. And particular with regards to town centres. And whilst I think everybody can agree that there has to be a strategy, you know, sometimes circumstances do not always fit the idealist vision of the planners. And there is a particular problem with adhering to the tablets of stone rather than responding to the changing circumstances. So does the Minister agree that flexibility and willingness to review such matters needs to be ensured so that, for example, proposals that would significantly boost employment and consumer choice are not overridden by a strict interpretation of guidelines of delegation and such what is and is not considered part of a town centre?
Minister.
I sense that as a slightly leading question, but in the spirit of which it's offered, I'll give a direct answer. Yes, I do. And the reason for that is sometimes policies will come into conflict with each other, and the planning system can be about conflict and people's individual demands. But let me be crystal clear about the planning system we're trying to create. It's an enabler with a can-do culture focused on sustainable economic growth. And all the other formulas and ratios and planning policies should flow from that. Sometimes, in relation to planning, a plan-led system will work fine, but we shouldn't have slavish adherence to a line and a map as the be-all and the end-all in a consideration. So sometimes we can depart from the plan if it can be shown that the material considerations are such it can justify such a decision. And that way, that may well be economic impact. That may well be jobs or economic recovery or what an application or a development could bring to a community. It could be very powerful. So a planner should bear that in mind. And I think that this policy represents a shift favourably towards economic impact within the planning system as a stronger material consideration. That's not to say it's any development in any place. It's the right development in the right places, focusing on quality and not necessarily at the expense of the environment. But I am convinced that with that culture, then the planning system can be more of an enabler. And I think we've got a good story to tell right now. Over 93% of applications in Scotland are approved. So it's not as if the planning system are all bureaucrats who love to say no. That's not the case. Better partnership working, understanding each other's needs, and creating that can-do culture means that to follow your language, that sometimes we can depart from individual policy aspects because of the material considerations which may well be impact. And when we turn to town centres, of course we need to diversify. Of course we need to be more creative. And that's why there's a new, very strong section on town centres and a town centre first policy in relation to the sequential approach that we've widened out, not just from retail, but to all aspects of development in a town centre. So I think the policies that relate to town centres is strengthened through that. And on Ravenscraig, I welcome Mr Pentland's welcome of Ravenscraig being a national project. I think that's symbolic of the regeneration of the central belt of Scotland, that there was an area that has its issues, became, I suppose, renowned for the deindustrialisation of Scotland, but also presents an opportunity for housing, for employment, for skills, for colleges, education, environmental innovation, green networks. That sounds like good criteria to be a national candidate project to me, and I'm very keen that it stays in as one of the 14 new designations, and I'm sure the member is as well.
Mr Pentland, do you want to come back?
I'm quite happy.
Sounds like gumption again to me in your answer there, Minister. Mr Wilson.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Minister. I'm going to break this happy consensus now, Minister, in terms of, I know, Minister, but it's the issue, the conflicts that exist in terms of SPP and NPF3. Now, we've just discussed Ravenscraig as a major project, and my understanding is it's almost a new town project. It conflicts with the SPP policy where you try and protect the existing town centres. There's two town centres border Ravenscraig, that's Wishaw and Motherwell. And how does the Minister deal with that type of conflict where you've got a major development proposed and included in NPF3, which, amongst other things, is about housing, it's about, as you said, education, it's about, and possibility of a new retail centre between the two existing towns, which are economically struggling at the present moment. If you visit Wishaw or the town centre or Motherwell town centre, you'll see that they are in decline and need some kind of economic boost. But by creating effectively another new town centre in between those existing two town centres, you could actually be creating greater problems for the existing town centres. And it's how does the Minister and his team deal with these types of conflicts that exist between your SPP policy in terms of protecting and enhancing town centres and at the same time going for a major development. Because it's not just about Ravenscraig. As you said, the NPF 3 and planning policy has to be flexible to take account of any new proposals. And we've seen another one in the Clyde Valley of Owenstown, where there is we had a display in the Parliament a couple of weeks ago where people want to develop a new, effectively new town in the border. So it's really trying to look at those conflicts and how you measure that.
Minister? I don't believe there's a conflict at all, because what the policies produce is protection, greater protection for town centres because of the sequential approach. The kind of issues that Mr Wilson's rightly concerned about in terms of Motherwell and Wishaw, they will have their challenges. All towns have their challenges right now. That's why we've got the external advisory group about to report imminently on what we can do to support the rejuvenation of towns across Scotland. But I'm not sure that simply stopping any development happening within a 20-mile radius is in itself a solution. If we were to deploy the view that there must be no new towns, and that was deployed some years ago, there'd be no Cumbernauld, there'd be no East Kilbride, there'd be no Owenstown, as proposed, as you've mentioned. What I think they can be complementary. So Motherwell and Wishaw can have their functions, their support, their protections, their rejuvenation, but so too can Ravenscraig. If Ravenscraig was just a big site of simply commerce and entertainment and leisure, it wouldn't be a new town. But because there's so much housing proposed as well, employment, housing, college, some of the infrastructure that's already there, I think it's good foundations to create a sense of place. And when planning works properly, it creates that sense of place. So it's not just commuterville that people travel to somewhere else for their local amenities or travel somewhere else for their employment. We're trying to put these opportunities in the one place. So I actually think they're quite complementary, whilst not dismissing the immense challenges that the surrounding communities face. I think they should see what's happening at Motherwell's and at Ravenscraig as an opportunity, not as a disadvantage. But we know we have to turn even more attention to the issues that town centres and indeed communities within cities face as well in terms of the regeneration. So the policies aren't in conflict, because what the policies say, if something has designation, then this is what applies. Now, the government didn't in isolation pick Ravenscraig to be defined as a town centre. That's actually a matter for the local planning authority, who determined, I'm sure possibly after inquiry, but would have gone through the full process of consultation, engagement in the local development plan and the regional plan, that it should be a town centre and that hierarchy. So actually I would have expected engagement in all of that as it arrived to the decision that Ravenscraig would be a town as designated by the local development plan, and what flows from that is a protection as they apply in the policy. So I actually think there's a good robust case around how the policies are complementary and will assist not just the new emerging town and community of Ravenscraig, but Motherwell and Wishaw as well.
I thank the Minister for his assurances that he has scrutinised the proposals to include Ravenscraig and the NPF 3 proposals. The Minister, going to SPP, you've made reference to, and my colleague Stuart Stevenson made reference to the situation at the present moment with local authorities, and particularly use the issue of wind turbines, where some authorities apply the current guidance of 2 kilometres. Other authorities, in Mr Stevenson's words, use the 400-metre criteria for the erection of wind turbines. That raises issues, Minister, about the current guidance that's issued. Can we seek some assurances, or can I seek some assurances, that the guidance that will be issued to local authorities come December will actually be clearer, will be more precise, in relation to how the planning authorities, because it's not just the planning officers who make these decisions, it's also elected members who make, the planning committees who make decisions, but so that the communities themselves surrounding some of these developments are clear, because what we see at the present moment is if you're in the Scottish Borders or South Lanarkshire Council makes a decision on wind turbines as a local authority. Scottish Borders makes a decision on the erection of wind turbines as a local authority. But both of them seem to have different policy criteria, which then leads to confusion for communities who live in the middle of that. And would it be correct to say, Minister, what we need is not just greater clarity in terms of the guidance issued for planners, but we also need greater clarity in the guidance issued so that communities can understand the guidance as well.
Minister.
I think that's a helpful point. If I can just briefly go back to Mr Wilson's final comment on Ravenscraig. You've trusted in my judgment. I would suggest you don't do that and you trust in your own judgment. So you can analyse, as can anyone. We'll publish the full criteria. The criteria was agreed. I raised it in Parliament before it was used in terms of what's mandatory and what a candidate project would have to comply with to become a national development. And I'm sure you'll be further reassured by the transparency around the process here and how we used the criteria to arrive at the 14 designation. So I would refer you to that documentation as well. On the subject of clarity, I think clarity comes from the policies and of course should flow from the guidance as well. And we're working very closely with all our partners, not least the heads of plan in Scotland, in terms of the professionals who actually use these policies, deploy them in terms of delivery. The private sector, I've got a very supportive quote here from the CBI, for example, around the planning policy, Scottish Property Federation and others. But crucially, your question was around community involvement as well, and we'll engage with Community Council liaison officers. But Planning Aid Scotland, who have also given financial core support to provide that service to communities as well, to assist them in the planning system. And they've also welcomed the approach in both documents. So yes is the answer to your question. We'll provide as much clarity as we can, as well as clarity, of course, we've provided through the planning free increased resources, which was a tough decision to make at this point in the economic cycle. And in relation to renewables, I think it's quite important to recognise that there's very mixed opinions out there. There's a mainstream opinion, and then there'll be the extremes on either side in terms of pro-renewables and anti-renewables, specifically on wind farms. But investors themselves are not saying they want to build anywhere and everywhere at any pace. They want clarity on what's appropriate and what's not. So they appreciate the SNH guidance on cumulative impact, or on the mapping, and on government intention around separation distance and so on. So I think we'll be even clearer than before, and that's probably why the renewables industry have welcomed the proportionate approach we've taken. And they have specifically said, Jenny Hogan, Director of Policy for Scottish Renewables, said it was important that the consultation brings greater clarity to all those concerned with making decisions. We agree.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. Anne McTaggart, please.
Thanks. Just a final point. And thank the Minister. That's been an extremely beneficial briefing that we had. But can I just ask the role from here on in, having read through the documents and having read and listened to yourself today, would it not be best, I mean, what is the role within the Infrastructure Committee and also the Rural Affairs Committee? Where do they fit into this? Because obviously I would think it would be huge.
I'm happy to attend other committees if asked to speak about these policies. I'm happy to engage in further scrutiny. There's more scrutiny in this process than either MPF2 or the original MPF. Public scrutiny, stakeholder scrutiny, engagement. I've been to a number of stakeholder events. There's been the parliamentary process. There'll continue to be the parliamentary scrutiny. There's the mandatory 60 days. We published a participation statement on who we would engage with and how I'm at the service of the Parliament committees if I have to appear elsewhere. What I would emphasise though is this is the planning culmination of other strategic policies. So this doesn't change, for example, the infrastructure investment plan or the marine strategy or other strategies which will already have been through the relevant committees. This brings together my contribution, the contribution of the planning service, the Scottish Government's vision around planning as they relate to all these other strategies. So they will have been consulted upon in the appropriate places, but what this serves to do is make sure we've got the planning hierarchy and the planning policies right. I hope that answers the member's question.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Can I be complimentary? Unfortunately, Minister, the compliment is not for your good self. But the document itself, the graphics, I think, are absolutely fantastic and so easy to take in. I believe that there are similar graphics to the ones that were used in Aberdeen City and Shire, who led the way probably in this regard. But I think that this document is so much easier to read than some of the previous ones that I've seen, and I think that's always useful in terms of getting responses from the public and other organisations to these consultations. Can I thank you all for your time today, and I close this meeting of the committee. Thank you.